So welcome everyone to our second Scholars in the Square lecture of the 2025-2026 academic year. Hello to those of you joining us online tonight and in the future on YouTube. My name is Rachel Brown and I am the director of the Center for Studies in Religion and Society here at UVic. As a reminder, our evening will unfold as follows. First, our speaker, Ken Derry, will offer a 20-minute public presentation, and then he will engage in a 20-minute period of conversation with Michel Desjardins, an expert in and dedicated teacher of religion in Canada. After Michel and Ken talk for 20 minutes, I'll chair a 20-minute open discussion period. And since the three of us, alongside Paul Bramadot, are the founders of the Teaching Religion in Canada initiative, this should be an especially fun conversation. So our speaker for this evening is Ken Derry. Ken is professor of religion at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. His teaching and research focus on the ways in which modern cultural products relate to more traditional religious beliefs and practices. He is particularly interested in connections between religion and violence in Indigenous literature and film and in popular culture. Alongside Ken's research interests, he is a passionate and committed teacher, a commitment that was recognized with a 3M Teaching Award. Ken is at the center of conversations about pedagogy and religious studies in Canada, and so we are in for a treat tonight. And because Ken's research and teaching both center decolonial action, and when reflecting on teaching any subject at the university, I think it is important to pause and think about the ways that our teaching can be a place where we contribute to, but also can fight against colonial ways of being and knowing. And so I want to say that we acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, Songhees, Wissefsen, Esquimalt peoples on whose territory the university stands, and the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. So now please join me in welcoming Ken.
Hi, thanks for coming. Yeah, it's always uncomfortable being introduced. I feel like I can only disappoint you now. Let's see. There we go. So I'm going to just start with a bit of context for my teaching. So I teach, the reason I was hired, the reason I have the job that I have is they were looking for somebody to teach the large Introduction to the Study of Religion course, which is very large. So it ranges between 300 and 600 students each term, and I teach it twice a year. So I teach a fall course and a winter course. I appreciate the expression of like, yeah, it's how I feel all the time. So I've been doing this, I was hired in 2010. So I've been doing this for a while now. Most of the students, as is common, I think, in many of these courses, take this as an elective. So that's a big part of thinking about how to introduce students to the study of religion. I teach, the smaller classes I teach in upper years are on religion and culture broadly. So I teach a course on film, one on literature, a course on violence, another one on stories, that kind of thing. One thing, oops, that's different. I think, oh gosh, sorry. There's a delay between what happens on my fingers and what I see up there. Okay, there we go. One thing that might not be similar across Canada is that most of the students in my classes are part of a religious tradition, which is something that I suspected for a long time, but now I ask them for a particular assignment to identify themselves. And it turns out that was true. And I recently learned this. So there was a census done in 2023, and I just somebody sent these results to me. So these are high school students, or sorry, students from kindergarten to grade 12 in the Peel region, which is the main school board region where our university is located. And that's the breakdown of religions among the students in those schools. And so most of our students are coming from Peel. So that kind of fit with my own sort of impression of what I was seeing in my classes. So I'm not teaching students who are unfamiliar with the concept of religion, at least in a particular way. In terms of what I want to talk about today, and thinking about how to introduce students to religion, part of that is thinking about teaching religion. What are some of the unique challenges or challenges that might be more obvious or problematic in teaching religion than some other subjects? These are not going to surprise any of you. One is that religion is often an upsetting topic to talk about, particularly to talk about in an academic context where you might be saying things that are critical. to people about their own traditions or about religion in general. And often, of course, people's understanding of religion and their sense of religion is tied to who they are as people. So if you start poking at that, that can be really destabilizing. It's one of the things that attracted me to the study of religion. Actually, as a student, I wasn't raised as in a religious home. And when I took my first religion course, I found that students cared a lot more about what was happening in that class than I was a science student, and they didn't care that much about what was happening in the physics class or the biology class. So you'd have conversations about the course material, but people didn't seem to be personally invested in ideas about physics in the same sort of way. I mean, maybe that's changed, I don't know. But when I entered religion classes, I thought there's an energy here that I find really compelling. And then kind of related to that idea is people pro or against have often very strong views about religion. Tendencies to overgeneralize religion is really about this. All religions have X, that sort of perspective. And so trying to shift that in some ways or get people to be a bit flexible or to ask questions about those views sometimes is more difficult than, again, questions about other sorts of things that may be not so related to religion. And then a last challenge that's not specific to religion, but I think makes the other two things more of a challenge is the prevalence of generative AI and the reliance of students on AI, the increasing reliance. So if they're not doing the things that we're asking them to do, they're less likely to change their views on the thing that we're trying to teach them about. And then the last challenge is something that I learned about just before the pandemic hit us, as it happens, which is trauma-informed pedagogy. I learned of this from a colleague, Sarah Richardson, and this idea that we're all living in various states of trauma, but it's invisible. Like, we don't know what we're all going through right now. Like right now, for example, somebody I know is dying, but you can't see that on me, right? And so students in our classrooms are, sort of in similar situations. We don't know what's going on. In a state of trauma, it's hard to focus and learn, and sometimes the way we teach can be re-traumatizing. It can make the situation worse for people. So one general response to this idea that people are in some state of trauma or could be in a state of trauma is to offer different kinds of supports. And that there's a whole range of things that get discussed in this conversation, but collaborative learning, being transparent about expectations, and grading, focus on what students can do, at least sometimes, not just on what they can't do, creating safe space for questions, allowing people to be themselves, that kind of thing. There's a lot of detail there, but that's a sort of broad overview. So goals, broad goals in terms of teaching religion for me, helping students see religion as more complicated than they might think coming into the classroom, being able to have and maybe even initiate difficult conversations that are important and grounded in evidence. Religion and violence is an example of that. Gain confidence in their own abilities. So just being able to do things, give them tools to do things with, and to solve problems. And then finally, make connections. And I think that making connections is related to the other things. It might not seem specific to any of that, but I think it's important. People working and thinking in isolation aren't as able to do the other things, I don't think. And I think education tends to isolate people, university education, maybe more so in the humanities than sciences. That was my experience. In science, I was often asked to work in groups of students, but in the humanities, it was very individual the work. So one thing I won't talk about today, but I do a lot more. I try to think about ways to do more group work or to create spaces for group work for students in ways that don't make them upset at having to do group work. We can have that conversation. That's complicated. So I just want to fairly quickly run through some of the approaches that I take to deal with some of the things that I've just mentioned. One is wearing sometimes thematic clothing, and some of these I've learned from other people. So in this case, I would wear often pink if I'm going to be talking about gender construction. I offer students an opportunity to send me an anonymous email if they have concerns or questions. They don't want me to know who they are. That came from a colleague at my university, sharing the fact that I'm a human being with them. I find helpful. Giving them food sometimes or incorporating food sometimes into teaching, something I got from Michelle. playing music, which I was going to try to do today, but we had technical problems. So I had a song I was going to play. So I often play a song before class starts. I find that's helpful. It sets a certain mood, and then I incorporate that often into the conversation. I use a lot of popular culture. And then finally, experiential learning. So, so very quickly, here's a slide I might show them to suggest that I'm a human being. That's a picture of me when I was 3. That's a picture of my cats. There's lots of ways to do this. I teach a course on Indigenous film. We start up with smoke signals. So 2 weeks ago, I brought students fry bread. I tell them what's in it. That's a picture of the fry bread. And this opens up a conversation into something called 5 White Gifts, which is a conversation about colonialism and how colonialism brought these gifts to Indigenous communities in North America and how it affected in very negative ways the food supplies of Indigenous communities. But it's a good way to get into that conversation. I bring fry bread and jam from a local Indigenous restaurant. This was the song I was going to play at the beginning. This is the song I played for the first class of Religion 101 this term, so I play something recent. And then I ask the students to tell me how they would connect the song to religion. And I tell them a little bit about the song and this film. How many people have seen this? Has anybody seen this? Oh, nice. Okay, nobody. All right, I'm very pleased about that. And part of the story is that the character in the center, so they are demon hunters and also a K-pop group. The character in the center is also part demon, and she's hiding this. So the conversation very quickly turned, the students turned the conversation to a conversation about religion and shame, and how religion can often, being in a religious community for some people can lead them to sort of have 2 selves. So the self that they present to the religious community and a self that they feel inside or present to other people in their lives, and how sometimes they're hiding their, at least an aspect of their true self. And so that's a messy conversation about religion that they did themselves sort of collaboratively. A required text in Religion 101 became The Lion King. So I used The Lion King to talk about theories of religion and sometimes to introduce sometimes challenging topics. So if you've seen The Lion King, part of the story is that the father dies, and then years later, the son has a vision of his father talking to him, which you won't be able to hear. But this is his father saying, "You are my son and the one true king." And he's telling him that he has to live up to his responsibilities. And this scene leads to a conversation about a theory of religion. Mary Daly was one of the proponents of this, that often the gender of gods is reflected in the gender of the people who are running things. And so we can very quickly sort of slide into a conversation about God's patriarchy and gender much more easily than I think anyway, than if I start here, because they can see it in The Lion King. And it also, interestingly, in my experience, it actually upsets them more about The Lion King than about religion, because many of them have heard this critique before, but they hadn't thought about gender in The Lion King. And they're like, oh no, why when the king dies, does the queen not become the ruler? In Lion King, that's not addressed at all. So yeah, so they're like, oh no, that troubles them. Finally, experiential learning. So here are a few things that I do. So for years, I've asked students, so this is where one place where they have to declare their religion. As I say, what religion are you? You need to go to a religious site that's not your religion and do an observation and a brief analysis of that. That I stopped during the pandemic, obviously. And I was trying to think, what could I do that would be something similar, where they have some kind of encounter with another religious tradition, but that would be COVID safe or plague proof. And in talking to Michel Desjardins, he was telling me about his religion and food interview that he'd been doing as an assignment for years. And I thought that would work really well. And they can do it over Zoom. So they can still have some kind of experience without worrying about getting infected. So I've continued that. So now those are the 2 assignments now that I do, but I've sort of decreased the importance of the site visit analysis in the course and made the religion and food interview the main assignment, with lots of assignments leading up to it. So tomorrow, for example, students have to submit a short list of texts they would use to do a little bit of research about the religion of the person they're going to interview. And they have to understand what would make a text reliably academic. So they have to show that the author of the text is an accredited scholar of that tradition, and how do they know that, and that sort of thing. So that's also another way to try to circumvent some of the problems of AI, because AI can't really do that. It can give them information that may or may not be correct, but it can't kind of give them all the pieces of it. So they have to still put that together in a way that is correct and also, yeah, helpful. I do a lot of class trips in different ways with the classes. When I teach film courses, we do a film trip. So I just say the students will pick the film that's playing and we'll go to the film. In 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be taking the students in the Indigenous film course. We're going to go to supper. So they just say if they want to go or not. I don't make them go. I just say, are you interested? And most of them say yes. And then we pick a date and then we just go. And it's kind of amazing. I've done walking tours with the students. Again, usually I hire a guide to do that. If I have money, I apply for money, and if that comes through, then I can do the walking tour. And I've taken them a few times to some kind of ceremony or ritual. So the different things that you do. And because of the logistics of doing this sort of thing, it's always one option of other options. So I say, we can do this. And if you can't make it, because they have to get there on their own, I don't have the ability to transport them. That's super complicated and involves a lot of forms. I just say we're going to meet at the place, and if you want to go, you get there, and if you can't or don't want to go, here are other options you can do, and they can also present other options if they want. And then finally, I've been involved with study abroad for a long time. I was a staff person for about a decade at the university, helping to run those programs, and now I'm still involved in some of that, but I've been teaching in study abroad programs for a while. So I'm just going to end with a few photos from some study abroad experiences, and I think that'll be about 20 minutes. So, okay, that's the restaurant we're going to in 2 weeks, called Tea and Bannock. Very conveniently, there weren't a lot of Indigenous restaurants in Toronto, and most of them closed during the pandemic. This one is quite conveniently like 2 blocks from where I live in Toronto, so it's very nice. It's not that far from the university too. I did a course last year. Part of my background is Japanese studies, and so I took students to Japan for a week and a half as part of a course on Japanese culture and religion. And this surprised me. The students all knew that there were deer in Nara. That was one of the places that we went. And that surprised me. And this also surprised me. I had not seen this before, and the students didn't know about this. But if you approach a deer and bow, the deer will bow to you. So here's a student doing that. And it is going to work. Right? And the students in this course, this was a 4th year course, they had to use their experience during the trip to come up with a research project idea connecting religion and culture in some way. And one student, most of them had an idea of what they were going to do before they came on the trip, and one student was stuck. He could not figure it out. And he was so excited to go to Nara because he was super excited about the deer. And I said, well, why don't you do your project on the deer? And I didn't know what that would mean, and he didn't know what that would mean. And then we saw this, and then he did this amazing paper on the deer bowing ritual. It was quite fantastic. So that was that's another way in which trauma-informed pedagogy works, where you're learning with the students, right? So this relates to the picture on the poster at the beginning. These are students that in a summer abroad course I taught in Hong Kong, where we go to Chung Chau. And the thing about this is the last visit that we make. And the thing about this temple that's kind of interesting is that it's situated on a kind of sports compound. And so when they go there, they're like, what is this about? And then I show them some images and videos of this Taoist bun festival, which is one of the most famous things in Hong Kong. And they create these towers of buns. And then they have a competition. Let's see if the video works. Where people climb the tower. These are plastic buns, and they try to collect as many buns as possible. And the higher up the buns are, the more points you get for the buns. And so, yeah, sometimes we drop in there. You can see the field. That's the field in front of the temple. So this is an example of sort of destabilizing understandings of religion, right? This is not necessarily what people think of when they think of Taoism. It's not what I would think of when I would think of Taoism. And then the last one I will show, this is from a student last winter in Religion 101, and this is her site visit analysis. So she sent me an email after she did her site visit. So this is an excerpt with her permission of the email. She insisted I use her name, actually. I wouldn't have put her name up, but she was like, no, please tell them who I am. And so this is Isabella. Good afternoon, Professor. I went to the Fo Guangshan temple yesterday for the Lunar New Year festival for the site visit. Very excited. Stayed there during the event, an hour before and an hour after, to soak up the entire experience. I did not know what to expect. I knew nothing about Buddhism. I thought I would walk in, observe quietly, and leave with a distant sense of what the celebration was like. But she found herself immersed, and she found the whole thing incredibly active and vibrant. And you can see that. So that's in this email, she sent photos. So I asked them to take one photo and submit it with their assignment, and which would be the photo on the bottom right or the top left. Actually, either of those would be fine. It has to be a photo of themselves at the site. But Isabella took a whole bunch of other sites. These are all things, yeah, that maybe people would not expect at a Buddhist ceremony. Almost like a kind of market. So those of us, if you know something about Buddhism and Buddhist festivals, would not be surprised by this, but if you don't, this could be quite something. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Bill and Ken will chat for 15 or so minutes, 20 maybe if you're lucky.
Oh.
You can slide that way a little more. Great.
You, Rachel.
Me too? All right, I don't need to be in the screen. All right, please.
I kept thinking to be a university student again. My goodness, it would be fun. Yeah, exciting. There are several things, Ken, I'd love to hear more about from you. And one of them is a bit about trajectory. So what kinds of things you've dropped over the years in terms of teaching and what things you've picked up. You mentioned in experiential teaching that you dropped a lot of the site visits for practical reasons and added something else. But in terms of what you do as a teacher, how have things changed? And then, lots has remained the same, I'm sure, but you could touch on some of those.
The thing that first kind of comes to mind that many people that I talk to about teaching have also dropped is I had a really strong emphasis early on students writing essays as an assignment. And so two things have shifted there. One, I now give students a lot more kinds of options. So do a presentation or a podcast or make a video or, interpretive dance. I always suggest puppet show, but no one has ever done a puppet show. It's always on my list of possible things. But I remember once I invited some colleagues to come and talk to me about this Religion 101 course at one point when I was thinking it needed to be shifted, like things I felt weren't quite working. And I had an essay in the course at that time, and one of them said, "What's the point of the essay? Like, what do you want them to get from doing the thing?" And I realized that it had nothing to do with writing an essay. And so I just broke it into pieces instead. I said, okay, write a paragraph that does this, and write a paragraph that does this. And I've kind of kept that, and I've put that in other courses now. If there's no need, like I still use essays sometimes, but if it needs to be driven by what I'm trying to do in the course. And I was so locked into that, right? Like students write essays, I wrote essays, everybody should write essays. So that's changed a lot. So the kinds of assignments have changed a fair bit. I certainly do a lot more. Like I've become a bit obsessive about having some experiential components in a way. I used to think, oh, it'll be okay here and there if it makes sense. But it happens. I do it all the time now. And some of it doesn't have to be that complicated. Like with the film course, it took me a while to go. Like I thought, well, I can't really do an academic field trip in the film course. But then I thought, well, we could just go see a film. And that became really important in a way because the students would pick the film, we would go, and again, the students didn't have to go as the class, but they had picked it. And then my job was to figure out how to make that film work in the course. So it was kind of a fun challenge. But I also realized that I could essentially, I could think about that in advance, but essentially that film became a way to do a review of the course. And I would just ask the students, right? And so I would have ideas in mind, but I would say, okay, this idea that we talked about, how would you relate that to, the Hunger Games that we just saw? And so that became really fun and collaborative, but that took a while. And then that field trip also started to incorporate a dinner because I thought, well, why don't we just go for dinner? One of the first times I tried that, we had this whole big conversation with the class, and they said that, because I don't live in Mississauga, so I didn't know where you could go to eat near the movie theater. And so they had this whole big conversation and said, oh, this is the place, no, that's the place. And then they voted and they picked the place. And I said, okay, so we'll meet at that place, like an hour and a half before the movie. And then I got there and there was one student. None of the others showed up at all. And so I said to him, you don't have to have supper with me. And he's like, nope, it's fine. And he was quite shy, actually. He hadn't spoken much at all in the term. And then we sat down and had dinner, and I learned all these things about him, and we became really connected. And that was quite lovely. But that was the only time only one person showed up. So things like that kind of would come to mind. Maybe trying to introduce, reorganize some things and, reduce some of the content because we all jam too many things. One of the things that I've changed in Religion 101 over the years is there's much more space now than there used to be for conversation in the class. That's a big shift that I've made over time. It's my classrooms are a lot more conversational than they were initially.
And why is that important, do you think?
It seems that students are more engaged. My impression, this is typical pedagogy, right? I feel that they're learning better. A lot of us do this, right? We think we know what works, but my experience has been that the students have a better experience. They learn better. They're more engaged. It also gives me a better sense of whether, how many of them are paying attention and are getting it, and also if they're not getting it, how they're not getting it, rather than if it's just sort of this way, right? I mean, there was always some conversation, but it's a lot more than it used to be. I do a lot more of the kind of version of flipped classes now than I used to. So I have some things recorded for almost every class now. So students have something if they need to listen to it, but and they can listen to that at different times. But in the classroom, we can have a conversation. It's really nice. When I started doing that, I mean, I really moved in that direction after the lockdown ended. And this Indigenous class I teach, film class, it's quite small. It's usually about 20 people, and we can sit in a circle. And it used to be more of me talking in that course, and now it's amazing. It's just, I mean, my experience is also better. So part of it's just selfish. I like being in those classes better, and I find it, especially when you get sad about teaching. Teaching makes all of us sad, I think sometimes. I think if you kind of care about what you're doing, and when I'm feeling like that, and then I have those moments, there's always moments in those spaces where I feel, okay, right, I don't hate this, right? This is really nice in some ways. The chat GPT stuff has just really chipped away at, I think, many of our souls. So I find that those conversations have been a good sort of bulwark against some of that. But I've shifted in that direction more over the years, for sure.
I really like the idea of trauma-informed pedagogy that you mentioned, and I'm not sure what to do with that in a sense, because there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of trauma that we carry, a lot of trauma that students carry for different reasons, and the world is in a state where there's increased trauma for various political and social reasons. But I had a colleague years ago at Laurier, Sarah Matthews, who studied that area, and she would use paintings and art to allow students to draw something out of their bodies, right, that they wouldn't otherwise do with words. And I'm hearing you do some of that, right, it's experiential learning, but I don't know if you draw other connections with this notion of trauma-informed pedagogy, because I find it so interesting. And I think for the study of religion, it might be particularly relevant.
Can you say more about what you mean by draw connections?
Well, with religion or with...
I don't know. I wasn't sure. You said draw connections, and I don't know. Did you mean draw connections with religion between trauma?
Well, draw connections with how you teach, right?
Right.
And so how we should think about trauma-informed pedagogy in the classroom, right? If that's front and center, and we're creating courses and teaching courses, and what could we do that would reduce the trauma, or maybe bring it out so that people can deal with it? I mean, we're not therapists.
No.
How do you use that in the classroom once you talk about it?
I don't always talk about it.
Okay.
I have it in my mind as much as possible, but it's had, I mean, thinking about it. So I guess two things. One is when I learned about it, I thought, oh, some of the things that had been important to me as a teacher kind of fit in that the approaches that are advocated by people who think about trauma-informed pedagogy. So things like playing the song at the beginning, right, gets people maybe out of think of sort of sitting in pain, right? It can be fun, it's distracting, right? Food will do that too. I mean, you've talked about the ways in which classrooms traditionally engage very few of our senses, and sort of recognizing that classrooms are made of bodies, and bodies need food and movement and these sorts of things. And so I've been doing some of that, and trying to create assignment instructions that were clear, and more and more over the years giving students models and examples and all of that. Like, I've been really resistant to that early on, and talking to people at our writing center about the value of those sorts of things. So I just sort of accelerated some of that, and one of the things that I did is I pulled back even more in terms of applying late penalties to things, trying to think about, again, what is the late penalty for? When is it necessary or valuable in my view, and maybe when is it superfluous? So I've reduced or removed almost all late penalties, thinking about this as well. I read a piece probably about 8 years ago now, where the person was saying, like, asking students to account for why they need an extension can be really harmful to some students, because I mean, the reason they might need this may have to do with something traumatic. I mean, this was before, I'd heard, or maybe even people had been saying much about trauma-informed pedagogy, but, her example was, she's had students that have told her, I just went through an abortion, or, I'm in an abusive relationship, or I'm dealing with food insecurity. And like, those aren't things that we should be asking students to explain to us. And I thought, oh, that just that seems so obvious, and I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. And so that also, when I was learning about the trauma-informed pedagogy, that sort of fit with that sort of framework as well. And so, yeah, I thought, I think sometimes, maybe most of the time, late penalties do more harm than good. So yeah, I do talk about it sometimes with students, but often not explicitly. I just talk about, I don't name it. I do talk about the ways in which many of us are in pain, in different ways at different times, and trying to communicate that I can see that, I recognize that, and they don't need to share their pain with me. So my message explicitly to the students is more, you can come and talk to me, even though I'm not a therapist, and I don't sort of give that caveat. I just say, you can come and talk to me, but I don't expect it. And if you need help, just say you need help, and then we'll figure it out. And so I sort of leave it at that, and I'll remind them of that throughout the year, especially when I know the times of the term that are more stressful than other times, right? And I also ask them, I saw Margaret Trudeau give a talk some years ago, and she mentioned that her mental health issues, she's been very public about those issues, but they were catalyzed by going to university in her first year. And she was thinking that what you need to be a healthy, functioning person, you need nutritious food, you need sleep, you need joy, and you need community. And those are all the things often that are taken away from us, right, by university. And so I'll put that slide up, and I'll ask students, how many of you feel like you're not getting enough sleep? And they'll put their hands up. How many of you feel like you're not eating well? They all put their hands up. How many of you are not having very much fun these days? It's just like, yeah. So again, I want them to see that they're not alone, right? That these are problems, right? But also, that at least I'm aware of the problems. I can't fix the problems, and I might be contributing to them in some ways, because you still have an assignment due on Friday. But yeah, so that's kind of how I approach it. Yeah.
Great.
Maybe one more question.
Yeah, I'll pass it on to you.
No, the funny thing is, I was actually going to ask, because there's a part of this question that I would like to hear you reflect on, and is there something about the study of religion that is more or less conducive to trauma-informed pedagogy? Because I think you touched a little bit on this, and so bringing it back to religion specific in our field,
why
I know, right?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's kind of what I was saying at the beginning. I think, if you're already in a state of some degree of trauma, and maybe you might even just be holding on to, like some kind of religious idea or belief or practice, and then you walk into a classroom and the teacher's saying, the Bible is wrong, right? I mean, not so directly, but here's some problems, or here's what's wrong with Lion King, the movie that you're so, you still love, and you're like, oh no, right? And so I think being aware of that and trying to, lead students to be critical, but in a way where they feel like, you're not just attacking them. I think that's even more important in a religion classroom, because I think because of how important religion is to students, right? It's so personal, right, in the classroom to talk about these things with them. I think to do it carelessly is not the way to do it.
But it's interesting because I think the answer would be quite different if you're teaching here at UVic, because you answered that question in a way that is situated within a context where all students have personal connections to religion.
Yeah.
And in most of my classes at UVic, that doesn't exist.
That's
right?
amazing,
In the world of the nuns, NONES, that sort of attachment isn't there.
Yeah.
But there's still lots of trauma.
Yeah.
But what might there be about the study of religion, the approach, this kind of classroom that might be particular to a pedagogical approach?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's something I never think about because it's so foreign to my whole teaching context. I don't think about it at all. Probably the best place for me to think about that would be my own experience as a nun in that way, right? Where for me, one of the things I was working out in religion classrooms was just sort of what do I believe and how do I see the universe, and sort of taking things from religions that I thought were meaningful or valuable, and not really, sort of, rejecting the things that I thought were, awful or harmful. But I think being in classrooms where instructors could have those conversations again in a kind of thoughtful way, that was really important to me. And that also attracted me to the study of religion. And I felt more upset. There were classes that I dropped because I would start taking them in religion, and then I found that the professor was not being thoughtful about this. And so even though it wasn't my own beliefs that were being sort of maybe attacked or sometimes promoted, right? I thought maybe thoughtlessly. I dropped a Zen Buddhism course because I thought this is bad, right? This I don't think is good for any of us, because it was just like, this is the truth. That was how he was teaching it. So even for me, I think I have a sense of the stakes of the kinds of conversations that we're having in religion classrooms. And I think those kinds of conversations need to be had, with care.
All right, well, we can open up to a broader conversation now to those in the room, both on Zoom and in person. So if anyone has a question, look around. Yeah, Peter.
Thanks very much for this talk. I'm impressed with your teaching style and the content you mentioned. And I'm just curious for your opinion. Do you think it's your style or the content that makes them better humanists as students?
Oh, that's a great question. The pop culture thing is kind of a good example of that. And I didn't talk about this, but the reason I use popular culture is because I like popular culture. And so I have seen popular culture used in really terrible, awful ways, right? I've seen people say, get mad at students if they haven't seen Star Wars, that sort of thing. So I'm very careful whenever I use it, especially now. I was doing this from the beginning, but now the kind of cultural landscape is so fragmented. And so, when I talked about Golden, for example, it's like the #1 song on Billboard and the #1 movie on Netflix, and maybe 10% of the students had seen it. So I can't assume, right? And even if one person hasn't seen it, you don't want to exclude them from those conversations. But I also have seen people use popular culture in a really condescending way, right? I'm going to go down to the students' levels and then, get them to sort of think about things that way. And I don't feel like that at all. I think this is interesting, complicated stuff that you can have interesting conversations about. So that is, a lot of that is just me. And so I think people need to find, as teachers, the thing that works for them in that way. So for me, pop culture works because I like it. And I find those conversations interesting. So some of that is definitely me. I also didn't talk about this much, but it turns out I didn't know this until I started teaching, but students find me very funny. And so I didn't know, I sometimes thought I was funny, but I didn't think other people would think I was funny. And that's really helpful too, I think, right? But it also is dangerous. Sometimes I can, misstep, and that's where the anonymous email, I've had students say, that was upsetting to me, right? You said that thing and people laughed and, and I thought, oh no, right? And so then I can address that. But I try not to second guess myself too much, but humor is really important as well, I think. But you can't, again, don't, like I've seen people, oh, this is so painful. I've seen people do a thing where they tell a joke. It's obvious they're telling a joke. The joke is not funny. Nobody laughs. And then they get mad at people for not laughing. This feels weird that I'm facing this way, but anyway, hi. And so, you don't want to do that either. So like forcing any of those things is terrible. Like I was a student in Michelle's classes and he's not funny. That's good, right? He needs to be himself, right? So if he was trying to be funny, that would have gone over very badly, I think. And I also pop culture probably wouldn't have worked. And like, you brought it in very like sort of very deliberate ways, right? Like you brought in the Matrix and stuff, right? At certain points. But you became attached to very particular things in a way that, I'm a bit more scattershot. I just get excited about stuff all the time.
Yeah, Brian.
Thank you. I'm fascinated. I'm interested in the kind of language you use in describing the learning outcomes in the syllabus. And then at the other end, whether you get any of that reflected back in the evaluations of the course, and then how you use that information.
Oh man, that's a really tough question. I think I'm disappointed in the language that I use in the syllabus for learning objectives. When I think about it, when you ask the question, like it's pretty standard. Like at the end of this course, students will be able to formulate coherent arguments about this or reflect on or demonstrate an ability. Some of it is okay. And I come back to it in more casual ways throughout the course. But it's funny, I don't know, this is embarrassing. I don't know that I've ever read course evaluations and specifically tried to make that connection. I mean, I'm looking for things that I can improve on, or things that I can dismiss or whatever, good or bad. But I don't think I've actually reflected on that. What the students are saying and how that might connect to what I'm trying to do in the course. That's a really good question. I feel, that's a gap for me, for sure. Thank you for that.
Well, you're so articulate. Have you ever thought of just record instead of like the learning objectives written? You give them a link and then I just talk about it.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Yeah. I mean, I kind of do that in that, I say what I want them to get from the course, but I haven't tied that in my head or in any other way to what I write in the syllabus. There's so much of the syllabus. I mean, I've tried to make it in a way somewhat engaging, but it's such a legal document in so many ways. And I keep trying to figure out how to highlight the pieces that I really want them to pay attention to. Like if they don't read the course objectives, I'm okay with that. But other things I want them to pay attention to. And so that's where my focus always is, but now I'm rethinking that in a way. Especially, I mean, that's a good question. Thank you. Yeah.
Scott, we have a question from Zoom.
In two parts. Shubham asks, comments first, the whole idea of experiential learning is fascinating, like experiencing food at a restaurant and going abroad to study religion and culture. My question pertains to boarding, lodging, logistics, and most importantly, finances. How do you get finances? For an emerging teacher, if you have any advice, please share. And then a follow-up question has to do with how you assess. How do we as teachers assess assignments that are subjective, experiential, creativity-based, or even trauma-informed? What rubric do you use?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Those are very different questions. So the first question, so it depends on obviously the kind of experience. If it's an experience overseas, then that's more of an institutional issue. That's not me as an instructor coming up with accommodations and so forth. So in the summer abroad program, for example, the university arranges with the University of Hong Kong for the Hong Kong program they book rooms in the residence, and then students can opt to use that as their accommodation. Some students have family in Hong Kong, so then they don't do that. And then sort of food is up to them. There's no meal plan provided because it takes place in the summer where a lot of that stuff is shut down. But in terms of funding, the university has done a lot of fundraising over the years so that they can provide bursary assistance to students in financial need. So it still is a kind of experience that is mostly for students of a certain degree of privilege. But I mean, as much as I know this is going out on YouTube, but I'll still say it, as much as U of T is maybe not the greatest institution to support students, it's done, in my experience, a really great job of being able to provide funding to quite a lot of students for these experiences to make them possible. So at least half of the students who went with me to Japan in February, for example, received a fair bit of money to subsidize their experience. So yeah, so that's kind of the answer to that. It's institutional in some way. The second question about subjective assignments, that's a kind of perennial challenge, I think. And whenever you do anything sort of creative or coloring outside the lines a little bit as a teacher, I think that's a challenge. And I also think, though, it might reflect the ways in which we perhaps are not honest with ourselves about how subjective the other kinds of assignments are and grading those. So, I mean, I don't know if anybody has done, those of you who've done what's often called a benchmarking exercise, and I do this every term with the teaching assistants, is I give them samples of assignments from previous terms, and I say, okay, what would you give this? And it's all over the place, right? Because they all have different understandings of what is good or bad, and they're looking for different things, and they have different standards. And so, like, that's a deeply subjective kind of thing to do, even with a traditional assignment, I think. But one of the things that I try to do, like if somebody's doing something, I had a student, I think this has only happened once. The way they did the assignment is they did a song. So they created a song because they were musical in some way. And so they wrote a song, they recorded a song, and it had lyrics to it. And so then I asked them to submit a piece of writing that's sort of annotating the song. And then that's kind of, I listened to the song, but I can't grade it as a song. And so I'm grading their thoughts about the thing they created and why they created it, why it looks that way. And it turns out not to be that much different than doing other kinds of assignments, but I need that piece. I couldn't just grade something that was a painting, for example. I've had numbers of students do paintings, but again, they give me some kind of annotated text that explains the painting, and then I engage with that. Often, to be frank, it's not that good. It's worse than the other assignments, and so that's a different kind of challenge. Is I want to reward the student in some way because I think they took a risk. And often in my experience, many students won't take that risk. Like if you give them a traditional option and then creative options, most students will do the traditional thing because this is definitely a risk to do it creatively. So I'm really hesitant to penalize students who don't do the creative thing well, but still they're often not good.
Todd, and then we have another one on Zoom.
Okay, thanks very much, Ken. I appreciate how thoughtful you are about the whole process of teaching. It's nice to see. So I have a couple of suggestions in response to some of the questions, and then I have a question.
Okay.
The first one is in response to the one about comedy in the classroom. I have a colleague at the University of Edinburgh who has been convinced for decades that and been on a campaign to get the people in her department and her colleagues to go to open mic nights for stand-up comedy.
Oh, to get better at being funny.
Well, just think about being funny.
Okay.
Experience being funny and not being funny.
Yeah.
And so she's on this campain.
Oh,
and,
that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's and she's been doing it now, so she's actually getting quite good at it.
Okay.
So if the jobs in academia start to disappear, she's got a different career. So there's a lot of benefits to doing that. The second point is in response to Brian's question about the learning objectives. As you were asking the question and as you were responding, I was thinking, because I do of course, we all do the syllabus learning objectives, but then I also do weekly ones, just like for whatever topic we're on. And then I was just thinking, because I'm not satisfied with mine either. A neat way something I'm going to start doing is each week get the students to write their own learning objectives. Like I start with mine, and then they, at the end of the week, come back with theirs. And then that gives me next semester's learning objectives based on, so sort of a collaborative approach to learning objectives. I think that may be helpful because it also gives me feedback on what I actually taught as opposed to what I think I taught.
No, for sure.
Yeah. And then so the last, then the question is, when you're talking about, and I've heard other colleagues say this before, that it seems to be post-pandemic, many of my colleagues have noticed that they've reduced the amount of material that they're including in the classroom and in the course. As a historian, I find it really difficult to reduce anything because I want to situate everything down to the most minute detail. Because I just feel that without the context, we can't get to the interesting discussion. So my question is, how do I overcome this fear? Or another way of asking the question is, how do you get to the interesting discussion if you don't all share at least some sort of understanding of the context?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I'm not a historian, so maybe I don't care that much. So thinking about, I think those two issues I think are related, like what are you trying to do, and then how can you reduce things? And so I have found that if I can get students to use, let's say, in a film class, a couple of ideas from this theory to understand a couple of things about the film, like that's kind of the goal. And often what I'm teaching is in itself, I don't think inherently important or valuable. Like I start off, the last couple of times I've taught religion and film, I start off by asking the students to connect Durkheim with Mean Girls. They don't have to, in their lives, know anything about Durkheim or Mean Girls, but I want them to kind of get excited about the whole process, right? Of seeing the film in a completely new way. Like that's another part of the goal. And so the more I throw at them, the less that's going to happen, I think, right? It becomes all trees and no forest. And so I think maybe sort of boiling down the thing you're trying to do and not being so, this is going to sound insulting, precious about the specifics of what you're trying to do. Because most of them don't care, right? And won't care in their life. So trying to create moments where they feel like a switch is clicked for them, or they feel kind of empowered in a way. They're like, oh, I get it, right? I can use this thing. Or maybe they didn't do the reading or watch the film and they're sitting back, and if they see other people having those moments, that can be exciting for them. And so that's kind of where I focus. So over time, I have become much less concerned about like the things that maybe I think are important. A kind of example of this is I've taught a course for years that's sort of a Bible and literature course, and the last time I taught it was terrible. And like over the years, students seem to be less and less kind of interested in reading the books, right? And so trying to have conversations about the books has become, like the last time I taught it was awful. And that's a course that in the past has done really well, and I really loved teaching it. And I started off as a religion and literature person. And so it was the last vestige of literature kind of in my life. And the books aren't long. Like I have them read Little Prince and I have them read Harry Potter and stuff. And they just really, it was terrible. But when the film courses continue to do really well, and the students pay attention and they're thoughtful. And so I think I have to walk away from the literature course. I don't know if I'm going to teach that again. But just because I really care about it doesn't mean they do. And so that becomes a bit, I don't want to have that fight. So sometimes that shifts and you have to kind of go with that wind as it blows. But yeah, it's funny because usually the students would self-select. The people who wanted to read books would take the reading books course. And I don't know what happened. Maybe that was a blip though. I might try it one more time and see, right? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful at all.
No, that's great. Thanks.
All right, we have time for one quick last question from Zoom, and Ken's going to give a very fast response.
Sure.
And it's going to be great.
Can I say before I ask the question, I just want to point out, I can see that some of the people who are on Zoom are people who took courses with me before. A couple of them who were in Japan this past fall. So that's kind of cool. Yeah.
So Aldia, apologies if that's not how you pronounce your name, says, thanks for this. I love the sense of kindness and assumption of human dignity that pervades the course design. My question, have you noticed any changes in the religious studies content needs of the learners you work with? I hear about change in pedagogy to respond to students' needs in many areas of their lives. but I wonder if you see any shifts in what field-specific stuff folks need to learn.
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know I'm a good person to answer it. I'm a little myopic in that way. I don't know what students need to learn in a broad sense. This kind of goes back to the question about, is it me or is it the stuff, right? I'm sort of teaching the things that I think are meaningful. I don't know if they are in a broad sense, and I'm never thinking about, not never, but I mean, my focus isn't on training students to become professors of religion, right? Like that seems like that's one person out of 1,000 maybe, I don't know, like what happens to all of the rest of them. And so I don't know. That's a really good question. I think about it more in terms of, I have to say, sort of skills development more than religious studies content. So I want them to be able to, again, have the tools to understand how to find a text or understand what constitutes, as sort of an expert in a kind of field. Like these seem like broader life skills, or be able to communicate their thoughts, and also to feel comfortable communicating in their own voice. Like these are the things that I sort of focus on. I don't think I ever focus on what's important. I mean, I'm teaching Durkheim. I don't think Durkheim is that important for anybody, right? It's just like, it's convenient. They can understand it. It works well with Mean Girls, right? And so like, it works so well with Mean Girls. Holy smokes. We could talk about that if you want. That was one of the things about teaching this stuff is that I find so fun is that it's a little bit of a game. Like I just sort of put random things together and I think, how might this work? And then you're like, oh, wow, right? This is fantastic. And then the students get to have that experience as well if all goes as I hope it does. So yeah.
Right. Well,
so that's not a good answer to Aldia's question.
We'll talk more about it, and we can talk more about it tomorrow for folks who are joining us for our first workshop for the Teaching Religion in Canada initiative that we are launching at the center. So we will be doing that tomorrow at 11. If you are interested in joining us hybrid, please just send us an email at csrs@uvic.ca. And we will look forward to that. And join us not next week, because next week we have a break. But the week after, on the 9th of October, we'll have our friend and fellow John Tatominal, who'll be talking about enlightenment, cause or cure for the post-truth crisis. So please join us for that. And thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you, Ken.